So I'm on vacation the last few weeks and actually drinking a Coke Zero when a new study here came up about aspartame and how the sweetener used in some of these drinks may cause intestinal tumors in mice. So before stopping my 2 or 3 Coke Zero per day habit, I wanted to dive into the science because I've heard this rhetoric before. They were mega dosing rats and mice with like 460 times the amount of sweetener and seeing kidney crystals and things form for the mice. So I just wanted to kind of take a step back, especially since this is a habit of mine to have Coke Zero, look through and see what this latest study is really saying versus the hype of like, you're going to get cancer, whatever people are saying online. All right, first, is this even the same thing that I'm drinking, Diet Coke versus Coke Zero? The study was done in Diet Coke. So Diet Coke is sweetened mostly with aspartame, but Coke Zero uses aspartame plus asulfazine. Phenylketonuria contains phenylalanine. So right, so this is the same thing. All right. So the first thing, we've already had these similar type of scares / real things. So the oldest one was saccharin. You see the little pink packet at restaurants and stuff. So this is like really old. It was from like the 1800s. And during the World Wars, when we rationed sugar in America, this was a big help for us. And the FDA then in 1977, they banned it because there was a Canadian study that found it caused bladder cancers in rats. And it was like a big deal. It sounded scary, but then it turned out that, like I said in the intro, the rats weren't having like the same dosage we were. They were having like 800 cans of diet soda a day equivalent. So at that kind of dose, a lot of normal things start acting like poisons. So yeah, I mean, Congress eventually blocked the ban. They put a warning label, and then eventually they removed that also. So now it's completely fine as far as consumption in America. But yeah, there is like a lot of history where if you would have been around during those days when it was banned, you still think it's a bad thing today. The second one is going to be called Cyclamate. So this one was banned. It was made in the 1960s. It was in something called Tab, which I've only seen on The Simpsons. I don't know what that soda's like in real life, but it's sweet and low mixed with, like, if you mix it with saccharin, it's in sweet and low. And again, it was banned in the 1960s, where there was one study where some rats again developed bladder tumors. So, and again, they super dosed the rats in order to make this outcome happen. So it was like 350 cans of soda a day, which is a lot, even for me. So yeah, so in those days, you were able to really super dose rats and just have a headline that would say, this is really bad, it causes cancer, and the political machines started moving. Mm. So despite that one study, in like the many decades since, they've had almost 100 studies, rats, mice, monkeys, even dogs, and they were never able to replicate this. So if you go to the EU, you go to Canada, Australia, and a bunch of other countries, you can still get cyclamate. But in America, it's still banned, which is interesting. So you can go to Canada and get it, but here they call it a carcinogen and banned it. So the third one is aspartame. This is the can on my desk. It was discovered by accident in 1965 by a chemist. It's really interesting because how it got approved is really interesting. There's a story about how Donald Rumsfeld got it approved. I don't want to get into the whole story, but basically it was like a political thing where he appointed this scientist to the head of the FDA, got it approved, and then that guy left, came back and worked. So it was kind of a bit of a shady dealing, but the science looked okay, actually, despite all of this shadiness. So I think that was the other one there. And then just to really quickly touch on like the money side. So it sounds like based on these 3 stories I've told that these scares are kind of overblown. It's not a big deal. But it's really a big story about money in that if you think about like the sugar industry, they pushed harder than anyone, right? So if you look back in 1967, the sugar industry had secretly paid over scientists a bunch of money to write these reviews in the New England Journal of Medicine. And it kind of set up the conclusion that, downplay sugar's role in heart disease and all these issues, obesity, and blame dietary fat. And the scientists did it for like 50 grand or whatever. And for the next 50 years, American nutrition advice was really like focused on fat. So when you look, it's like cut out fat. We even had Leia's, all that trans fat, zero trans fat, all those things. And people kind of didn't focus on sugar. So we had all these low fat, high sugar foods. And the scientific research was all BS. It was all just paid for by the sugar industry. So that's kind of interesting. And all this came out like 10 years ago, 2016. But even I think Coca-Cola did a whole thing in 2015 where they funded research about saying obesity is because of exercising. Like you're not exercising enough, not about what you drink. And they funded a research group about that, and like some emails got leaked, and it was a big problem after that. Of course, nobody talks about it now, 11 years later, so it wasn't that big of a problem. But just kind of wanted to say, based on all of this history, the context, you can kind of see that these artificial sweetener scares are originally on these really big, 400, 800 times normal dosage on rats, and then they weren't able to be reproduced. So, kind of the average person, you know, drinking their soda is kind of caught in the crossfire of this political slash monetary feud. And to get back now on this 2026 study, so I want to make sure that since I've talked about all the previous studies were basically megadosed or BS from some sugar industry funding, this one actually doesn't. So the mice weren't drowned in sweetener. They had lower doses, and it kind of made sense. It's supposedly independent academic work, no sweetener or sugar money behind it. So that matters a lot. Again, though, this was not, they weren't feeding mice. This was like mice cells in a dish. So that's what we call in vitro. So in vivo would be like in the actual body. So these mice were given a special genetically built strain to grow these intestinal tumors no matter what. So it's basically you get these cells and you make them grow tumors before you introduce the experiment. And so then when you introduce aspartame to this versus the control ones, which are just building tumors, the ones with aspartame grew faster. There's a bunch of like difficult to pronounce names in there. You can read the article or the study, which I'll link. And it hasn't been reproduced yet, and we're not really sure. WHO still calls aspartame possibly carcinogenic, but it's the same category as like aloe vera and pickled vegetables. So yeah, I think it's not that big of a deal looking at this study. So what am I going to do? Am I going to still have these Coke Zeros? Yes. I'm not going to quit over this one study. Again, it's not human. Yeah, it's not even really mouse. It's just like mice cells. And I think the data has been pretty good for 40 years. I don't think it's, is aspartame poison or causing cancer? Maybe I'll cut down to one or two instead of three. I'm not sure. But anyways, whatever ritual I get from my can, I'm gonna stick with this one. So I want to make sure that no one else panics at this headline. Don't trust the money and all these other things. Yeah, I would say, yeah, so don't panic at the headline. See what who's paying for stuff. Follow the money, as I think a lot of detective shows say, on both sides, both the sugar side and the sweetener side. Whenever you read these studies, I think the number one thing to know is you just read the study, check the dose. So if they're giving super high doses, it's probably not relevant. Then you could also check the model. Are they giving it to animals? Are they giving it to just animal cells in a petri dish? Or are they giving it to humans? So you could see there's like some separation. And yeah, I think if that if that's helpful, hopefully people will keep enjoying Coke Zero. I will, but yeah, maybe I'll cut down just a little bit, just because, not because of the science, but just because I don't know why I'm drinking so much Coke Zero. Definitely don't need it. But all right, thanks.